Welcome back to the Dershow. I'm broadcasting once again from Israel. I'm here for just a couple more days and participating in a really interesting and important debate in Israel about the Israeli Supreme Court. It's the mirror image of what's happening in America. In the United States, the left wants to cut back on the power and jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Some people want to pack the court on the left. Some people want to have age limits or term limits. They don't like the fact that the Supreme Court is moving to the right. In Israel, it's exactly the opposite. It's the right that wants to curtail the Supreme Court because they think the Israel Supreme Court is moving too much to the left. It's in the nature of Supreme Courts and judicial review that half the people will always be upset with the decisions of the court because Supreme Courts are counter-majoritarian. They're not supposed to just reflect the will of the people. They're supposed to reflect the rule of law, and there's different interpretations as to what's the rule of law. But it's a fascinating debate, and I've spoken about the issue with the Prime Minister of Israel, with the President of Israel, with leading academics, legal officials, and I was in a conference today about it. But let's come back to the United States, actually, not only to the United States, but to Russia as well. Today, I want to talk about the exchange that occurred after our last show last week between Brittany Griner, great WNBA superstar basketball player, and this merchant of death named Victor Bout, who was prosecuted and convicted of selling arms that were used to kill innocent people and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He actually served about 40% of that before he was released. So it's not as if he was released after just 6 months. He served a considerable amount of time. So did Griner. I mean, she served not that much, but she served 9 months or so before she was released. And of course, her crime wasn't really a crime. She may have brought in some vapes, which had maybe a little bit of hashish. That's a slap on the wrist. And if she weren't an American WNBA superstar, she would have either been told to go home or she would have gotten, a week in prison or a month in prison or a fine. But obviously, Putin saw a hostage and he held her hostage and he wanted the release of this guy Bout, I don't know how you say his name. He got what he wanted. Now, everything's political in America and everything is partisan in America. And so Donald Trump announced yesterday that he had been offered the deal to let this guy, Paul Whelan, who was also in prison. This is before Brittany Griner was in prison. There was an American who was in prison for what seemed like a phony charge. And the Russians offered to free him in exchange for the freeing of Bout. And Trump said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, I wouldn't have freed, anybody for that. The merchant of death deserves to stay in prison. So, everything becomes partisan. So Whelan's still in prison. His family is seeking to have him released. Griner and others are pushing for his release. And there's another American in prison, a guy whose name is Mark Fogel, who was a school teacher. And he was arrested for very similar charges that Griner was arrested for, a tiny amount of marijuana, legal in the United States and not legal in Russia. But again, he got, I think, a 14-year sentence or something like that. Clearly, he's being held hostage. And the question is, what trades will be taking place? Now, I have a lot of experience in this, probably more experience than almost anybody. I've arranged spy trades, the most prominent of which, of course, was the great Anatoly Sharansky, Natan Sharansky. He was arrested on phony charges of spying for the United States, actually facing the death penalty. I got persuaded Jimmy Carter, who was then president, to make a rare announcement which presidents don't make. They usually don't deny whether or not a person was a spy for America. But Jimmy Carter making a public announcement saying, no, he's inquired deep into the CIA, and he can represent for sure that Sharansky was not a spy, had no connection to the CIA, but the Soviets kept him there. Anyway, and then one day, this is a really interesting story. One day, a professor from East Germany who was visiting, I don't remember, MIT or Harvard or Tufts, one of the major schools in the Boston area, got arrested for spying for East Germany, which meant, of course, the Soviet Union, against the United States. And I got a call from the East German spy trader. If you ever saw the film Bridge of Spies, that's the guy. His name was Wolfgang Vogel, the guy I dealt with. And he asked me to help him, his East German guy, get a lawyer. So I did. I got people I know who were excellent lawyers to represent this guy. And that began a process which culminated in my going over to Europe, meeting with Wolfgang Vogel and arranging a trade in which Sharansky was released, and so was the East German spy. When Sharansky made it back to America, he threw his arms around me. I had never met him. You know, he was arrested. I couldn't visit him in prison. They didn't allow that. His mother and his wife asked me to represent him, and he threw his arms around me and he whispered in my ear, Baruch Matir Asurim, the Hebrew meaning, blessed are those who help free the imprisoned. That was the biggest fee I ever got. In any case, I didn't charge him any money, obviously, but having him recite that blessing to me and seeing him go to Israel and become the father of two wonderful children with his wonderful wife, and then becoming part of the Israeli government now, being a big advocate of human rights, that's a thrill that no lawyer can duplicate, no matter what clients you had, no matter how much money you might have made. A pro bono free case on behalf of somebody like Natan Sharansky is worth everything. And so I'm experienced with spy trading. I was also involved in an effort to try to release Nelson Mandela. Mandela rejected that and said he wanted to be released, not as part of a trade, but on his own terms, when the South African white apartheid government was ready to release him. And so he was a very brave man, Mandela, and was released. But spy trading is unfortunately part of the reality. You know, some countries like Israel and the United States say they won't ever trade, but they will. You remember when a young Israeli soldier was captured, Gilad Shalit? He was traded for 1,000 Hamas terrorists, prisoners. And he was traded by Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a really tough guy who's written books about terrorism. But, you know, when the parents of the kid who's in the army come to you crying and saying, please, you got to help my son out, or when the wife of Brittany Griner comes to the White House and says, you have to let my wife out, it's very hard to resist those kinds of human requests. Obviously, the brain and the heart operate in different directions. The brain generally says, no, you don't trade a person who is falsely convicted of a minor crime for a major merchant of death. You take the Trump position. That's the mind position. The heart often points in a different direction. You have to save an American citizen who could be spending a long, long time in the gulag and perhaps not even surviving, because, you know, a lot of people die in the gulag. Their amount of food they give you and calories are not designed for healthy living. So there you have it. But, you know, it doesn't come free. I understand what Biden did, and I agree with it. It was the right decision. It was the only decision. We all wish he could have gotten Whalen. We wish he could have gotten Fogel, but he didn't. He couldn't, and he settled for what he could get, and that's important. Now, what does that mean for the future? Does it mean that every traveler going to Russia is at risk of being arrested? It certainly means if you go to Russia, do not bring any drugs, do not bring any marijuana. I went to Russia numerous times during the 1970s representing dissidents, and I was warned by the State Department over and over again, don't give them an excuse to arrest you. Now, I can tell you here now that I didn't necessarily listen. I smuggled in a copy of the book Exodus, which I knew the Jewish community in Moscow and Leningrad wanted to read. And then when I left, I smuggled out a statement on a recording by a dissident who was about to be drafted into the Army for 25 years, and he wanted to be able to come to America. And he made a statement, and I recorded it in the middle of a Tchaikovsky tape and stuck it in my briefcase and brought it back in to the country. It was probably stupid. I could have easily been arrested and held as a hostage. But again, heart over mind. I foolishly exposed myself. Fortunately, I wasn't caught. And the book Exodus that I brought in was translated immediately and distributed throughout Moscow and Leningrad as samizdat, that is privately published material. And a lot of people liked it and a lot of people read it. I was in the Soviet Union representing dissidents, two of them facing the death penalty, and I helped save their lives. I went to the Vatican, and the Pope eventually appealed to the Soviet Union, as did the European communist parties, and we ended up saving the lives of these two men who had committed a crime. They had hijacked an airplane, not in midair, but basically stolen an airplane that was about to take off. And it was loaded with Jewish refuseniks who were trying to escape to Sweden. But it was always going to be caught. The KGB was aware of it, and there was never any chance they could have escaped. But they were sentenced to death, and I helped save them. They both now live in Israel and have had good lives. So, you know, these are things that lawyers do. As you probably know, I do half my cases pro bono and a lot of them internationally. It's been a real honor to represent dissidents ranging from Václav Havel to Anatoly Sharansky, and to have participated at least in efforts to get Mandela out. And I now, just today, help rescue somebody. I can't get into the details because not all of his family is out, but I met today a man that I helped get out of a very bad situation in a very bad part of the world. And so we drank a toast in my apartment that I borrowed in Jerusalem, and met with some of the other people who were responsible for his release. You know, these are great moments. He hugged me and, you know, told me how important it was for him to be in Israel. These are great moments. These are the things that you live for if you're a human rights lawyer or a civil liberties lawyer. And these are the kinds of things that, you know, help unite people instead of divide them. As I said, even the decision to release a Griner is divisive, because we know that it will just encourage the Russians to hold more hostages. It will just encourage other countries to do the same. When terrorists are released, that just encourages terrorism. But again, no country that I'm aware of has ever really applied the policy of no, we will never negotiate with terrorists. They all say it, but they don't do it. And if one country started a long time ago and said, look, we know it's going to result in the sacrifice of some people, but we will not negotiate with terrorists. We will do what the Israeli government did successfully at Entebbe and at Sabina Airlines. We will send in troops and kill the terrorists and rescue the hostages. Of course, at Entebbe, we know that Benjamin Netanyahu's older brother Yoni was killed, and that was a tragic event for the Netanyahu family and for Israel. And in Bibi's new book, which he gave me a copy of and signed very nicely, he tells the story in detail about how he learned of his brother's heroic death, and he was the only Israeli soldier killed in the rescue at Entebbe. And that was the policy of Israel for a long time, but eventually Israel succumbed and did what every other country does. Germany did it after the events in the Olympics. England has done it. France has done it. The United States has done it. I know of no country that has adamantly stuck to the proposition that no, we will never, under any circumstances, negotiate with terrorists. So again, the heart pushes in one direction, the mind pushes in another direction. I really congratulate Ms. Griner, and can't wait to watch her get back in uniform and play her heart out. I don't think she'll be going back to Russia to play. You know, she got into this mess because in the off season, she went to Russia to play. And you'd think the Russians would appreciate the fact that one of the greatest basketball players in women's sports, one of the greatest athletes in women's sports, would go to Russia. I don't think Russia's going to get a lot of athletes coming there to play in the off season. First of all, a lot of people won't go to Russia now because of what it's doing in Ukraine. But second, you know, going to Russia these days, you know, we don't know the full circumstances of Griner, but it's the easiest thing in the world to plant a little bit of marijuana in somebody's suitcase, or a little bit of hashish in somebody's suitcase, or a vape. Takes no talent for law enforcement in Russia to do that. I'm not suggesting that happened here. I don't think it much matters. But even if you go there completely clean and with no possibility of a crime, they could frame you, and frame ups happen. I know frame ups happen from my professional and personal experiences. So be careful about traveling to Russia. Be careful about traveling to other tyrannical regimes. I've traveled to all of them, and fortunately, I've been lucky so far. Don't know whether I'll be traveling to any of those countries again, but at this age, 84, I'm not going to be carrying any contraband or taking any chances. Could they slip something into my luggage? Of course they could, but you have to live your life. And so, Brittany, welcome back home, and congratulations to all the people who helped bring about this wonderful reunion between Brittany and her wife, and between Brittany and her teammates. And I think nobody should stop putting pressure on Russia to release both Mark Fogel and Paul Whelan. It's not going to be easy because Germany has somebody that Russia wants, but apparently the Germans won't release that person to save an American. Don't know whether they should or not. They released many people. As I said, again, the Munich Olympics, they immediately released all the murderers, practically before they were even in prison. So Germany doesn't have a lot of standing to say we don't negotiate prisoner releases, but what they're saying is we won't give up a German prisoner to help an American come back to America. That doesn't seem like a good alliance work. It seems to me Germany should cooperate with the United States, and if they can release somebody who's not a danger, I mean, I don't think you ever release somebody who poses a current danger. Then, and if they could do it and help bring about the release of two innocent people, Mark Vogel and Paul Whelan, that would be the right thing to do. So we'll keep you up to date. I'm sure the United States government is very anxious to secure the release of these two others. Vogel hasn't been in the headlines very much. Whalen is in the headlines, and as you know, President Biden tried desperately to get him released, but it didn't work. So I'm interested in your views. Are we going to divide along pro-Trump, pro-Biden lines? Or those of you who are Trump supporters going to say Trump was right about this, and those of you who are Biden supporters say Biden was right about this? Or are you going to make up your own mind and ask yourself whether or not the United States should have released Brittany Griner in exchange for a really bad guy who had already served, to be sure, much of his sentence, though not most of his sentence. So that's the question for today, and I'm interested in your answers, or I'm interested in your comments. So let's now get to comments. Okay. I think it's disgusting that you are perpetrating the lie that Trump disparaged a disabled person. Hey, I saw it with my own 2 eyes, and so did many of you. You can go on YouTube, you can see the videotape, you can see what Trump did, what the reporter did, and you can make your own judgment about that happening. Second, it's a lie that Trump wants to get rid of the Constitution. This is no different than the same left-wing claptrap we've been hearing for years. My criticism of Trump is that his personal decisions have been atrocious, including having any affiliation with you, me. In other words, me successfully defending him in front of the United States Senate was a mistake, I guess, but having a meal with Kanye West and that other thug was not a mistake. Look, if you're a Trump always is right person, you're always going to come to those conclusions. If you're a person who says, look, I'm going to make up my own mind, sometimes Trump is right and sometimes he's wrong. As you know, I've praised Trump over and over again for the Abraham Accords, for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, for recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel. I praised him for things he's done unrelated to Israel. He did a great job on the economy. He did a much better job on foreign policy in many respects than Barack Obama. So I'm not one of these people who says everything Trump did was wrong or everything Trump did was right. I think a lot of things he did were wrong. A lot of things he did were right. I didn't vote for him. That's my prerogative. It's your prerogative to vote for him, but let's not call each other names. Here's a positive thing. It's amazing. It's on Rumble. I never get positive notices on Rumble. It says, I very much enjoyed your podcast, though I don't agree with a lot of your opinions. I find you honest, straightforward, and intelligent because of your demeanor, telling it as you see it, without attacking, insulting, or canceling people. I've attacked, insulted a few people. For a different train of thought, I have learned much about the subjects you discuss. Thank you for helping educate me about much I never would have known if I didn't start listening to your podcast. So that's very nice. So, listen to my podcast, even if you disagree, and write me letters, even if you disagree. I will, on occasion, read the really nasty ones, but I'm getting more and more letters saying, please don't read the nasty ones. It just encourages the trolls and others to continue to make nasty comments. And a lot of the viewers and readers are not interested in that. All right, here's one. What a loser. This is the backyard, I don't know what that means, that defended O.J. Simpson and said on national TV that he lied to get Simpson off. Okay, this is Pewter Skull 67. I'll give you $1,000 for your favorite charity. I don't care if it's Hamas or it's any right-wing organization. You get $1,000 cash if you can prove what you just said. Of course, a total lie. I never said on national television that I lied to get Simpson off because I didn't. As you probably know, I was the appellate lawyer. I wasn't in court except to argue one or two motions. I didn't argue to the jury. I never lied about O.J. Simpson, and I certainly never said on national television that I lied. And you compare me to Alex Jones because you don't think Alex Jones should have been found liable for defaming the poor parents whose kids were killed in school killings, which he said were not real, were fake. No, I don't think that comparison is an apt one. Stop spitting the BS. I haven't found any solid evidence that Trump wants to suspend the Constitution. What about his own words? What about his own words? Read his own words. Go online and read what he actually said. And you'll see that he was open to the possibility of, if there was so much fraud in an election, of suspending all the rules, even the rules of the Constitution. Okay, let's see what else we have here today. This is an interesting one. He's probably right. The economy will determine if Trump wins or not. That's simple. Tell me how the economy is doing in 2024, and I'll tell you who wins the presidency, Biden or Trump. Look, that goes back to James Carville's advice to Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. And it often is the economy, but not always. Not always. You know, it's interesting. We're seeing tremendous divisions around the world. We're seeing it in the United States. People don't speak to each other. People in Martha's Vineyard, kids I got into college, won't speak to me because I defended Trump. We're seeing it in Israel, where people won't speak to each other. We're seeing it in France and England. We're seeing it in Poland and Hungary. Obviously, we're seeing it in Russia and the Ukraine. The economies are pretty good around the world in most places. There is obviously too wide a disparity between the haves and the have-nots. But, you know, this is one of the first times that we've seen this kind of hatred spewed forth on both sides when the economy is not bad. I'm not saying the economy is great, but we're not in a depression. We don't have massive unemployment and long lines. We don't have massive inflation of the kind we had during Jimmy Carter's presidency. And yet people just won't talk to each other. And so I don't know whether it's going to be the economy. The economy will have a big impact. Now, you know, the economy gives a big advantage to the incumbent, because the incumbent can influence the economy, not to a large degree, but at least to a small degree. You can turn off the spigot, turn on the spigot, substitute a little bit of inflation for a little bit of recession. There are manipulations that can be done, especially during an election year, and that's something both parties can do. So there are those who are saying that 2013 may be a bad year for the economy in order to prepare for 2014 being a good year for the economy, so that the incumbent can be reelected if the incumbent runs. Any comment about the Twitter files? Yeah, I got a lot of comments about the Twitter files. First of all, I think that Barry Weiss and the others are doing a great job in releasing the Twitter files, and I think that Elon Musk has done a good thing for the country in releasing them. And I think this raises very, very serious questions. You know, Twitter and Facebook and all these other social media companies have a First Amendment right to decide what to put on and what not to put on. Government can't tell them what to censor or what to print. So they have a First Amendment right. But if that First Amendment right is being influenced by the government, which does not have a First Amendment power to censor most things, then what we're seeing is a circumvention of the First Amendment. We're seeing the government using its influence on the private media to effectuate censorship in a way that it couldn't do directly, but is doing indirectly. So I would hope there'd be further inquiry into this, perhaps through lawsuits, perhaps through congressional hearings. It would be great. You know, our country doesn't have these commissions the way some countries have. Again, Israel, where I'm at now, and Great Britain have what are called essentially royal commissions. They have former judges, former deans, former, prominent people who serve on commissions like the 9/11 Commission. We did have a 9/11 Commission, and that worked quite effectively. And I'd love to see a commission appointed of people who are really knowledgeable and can look into the impact of government on private media and the impact of private media on the government, the relationship between the two. I think that's an area worth pursuing, and an area which affects the rights of every American. And so, 3 cheers for the people who are responsible for producing this information. And there's nothing definitive yet, but there's enough to raise a real concern about whether or not government actors had an influence on Twitter's decision based on the desire of some of these government actors and some of the people who work for Twitter to see one party rather than the other party elected. Again, I want to do this in a nonpartisan way. For me, this is not about who won which election or whether the election would have been different. For me, it's about the future. I want to know, I want to be assured that the thumb of government, the heavy thumb of government, is not on the scales of what gets shown or not shown on social media. You know, I can understand where the government might want to censor health information, which they believe might kill people if it gets published. That's very different than political information about which people can reasonably disagree. So let's have your letters on all these subjects, and see you from Israel again tomorrow night.